online today. Congratulations on setting up your business in Dubai. What are you up to in Dubai, Nav?
Thanks, Nigel, for having me on. So the Cybertree paradox, yeah, we shifted out of the UK in tail end of December after lockdown 2.0. Yeah, we've set up a subscription-based cybersecurity services firm serving the GCC. And we're also continuing with the Cybertree Paradox podcast, which is season 2 is out now. And funny enough, we were filming in London yesterday for episode 4 of our documentary series. So I was doing a remote production, which was quite fun to do.
Oh, fantastic! So, subscription-based service. That sounds quite unique. What's that about?
So I'm trying to effectively, constructively disrupt the consultancy marketplace by providing consumption-based models around cybersecurity, right? So for a lot of small, medium-sized businesses, actually even some enterprises probably don't require a full-time cybersecurity team. And generally, if you go out to the contract market, or you're pulling services off potentially an IT provider, or you're using native tooling from whatever AWS, G Suite or Microsoft, you may not necessarily truly understand how to run effective cybersecurity. So what we're doing is breaking it down into very digestible, consumable things that they need to do from a hygiene perspective, from an operational one, and when necessary from a technical one. And we don't charge them an arm and a leg to do it. It's all about what they actually need rather than what advisory firms are trying to sell them.
So it's just like an a la carte menu for cybersecurity.
In a way, so we've structured it such that it's run on different tiers. You've got a bronze, silver, and gold, and we start with the very basics. Let's understand your risks. Let's understand your controls. Let's look at what your compliance requirements are. Let's see where you are in terms of education, training, and awareness, and let's look at some of the technical things there. And that's the starting point. And depending on what they do and how they're focused, then we can expand. But yeah, I mean, generally it's all consumption based. It's flexible. It's monthly billable. So for small businesses and startups that can't afford huge amounts, in Spectrum. And actually, what they get then in turn is probably a team of 5 people, because the disciplines are very different between the functions.
Nav, good luck with that, mate. Thank you very much for coming on. As you know, a number of people have mailed in some questions, so I'm just going to be Graham Norton here, without the wine, I'm afraid to say, and I'm just going to rattle off the questions as such. So let's start with, and the whole idea of the webinar is about the COVID world. So let's start where you think the predictions around cybersecurity pre-COVID are, and pre-COVID, and what do they look like now in 2020? So what was happening before, and what does it look like now, mate?
So I think pre-COVID, we were seeing a usual trend up in cybercrime, generally around pokes at critical national infrastructure. As you would see, 2019 was quite significant in that regard, and it was generally predicted it would increase by X amount. On the other hand, the pandemic really changed that. You had a dramatic shift from probably tail end of December towards March. And when we, in the UK, went into the first lockdown, you had suddenly this significant shift of people from office environments working from home. Actually, you saw this huge increase in, online crime activity. And it was a direct correlation to people working from home. So this assumption that criminal gangs very quickly adapted to the fact that there was a pandemic. And took full advantage of that. Actually, the NCSC had to set up a special hotline so people could start reporting the ransomware and the malware that was getting, and then you saw this massive increase of attacks on the National Health Service. It was back to that point. Luckily, they'd learned their lesson from 2016, 2017. So we didn't see a major breach. But yeah, the prediction is that we're probably gonna see this roll over until 2022. I see it ever increasing, and that threat landscape has probably increased quite significantly as well.
Has there been in that pre and post, or sorry, we're not even post, sorry, pre and current landscape? Has there been a change in tactics from those wishing to infiltrate systems, organisations, peoples, etc.?
I don't think there's generally been a change of tactic, but there's been an increased volume of it, right? So, the easiest point of entry for a lot of criminal organizations, or is phishing, farming. It's looking at what's the lowest common denominator that we can attack, and generally a lot of this stuff is, the result of people not paying attention, and the significant increase in that disruption also is the change. So if organizations haven't effectively educated their people in the right way around the change, suddenly you're working from home versus you're working in the office, you might have a single laptop or a single machine, and it's being used by multiple people. So I think that the tactic probably not, but the volume has significantly increased, and I think it's going to increase even more.
I had an email last week inviting me to my COVID vaccination. I had it on the 2nd of January. And so, that was a clear example of a phishing attack, and quite a clear one. But it was very cleverly done, very cleverly done.
Yeah.
And of course, it's playing on people's emotions at the time. Come and get your vaccine. You're a 57-year-old guy. They didn't realise I work in healthcare anyway. So, and I had it on the 2nd of January anyway. So, but they didn't realise. So it's playing on people's emotion, I guess. So most probably in the current COVID world, that's an example of the complexity of the thinking around, actually, whilst the systems haven't changed, whilst the attack hasn't changed in terms of phishing, as you quite rightly say, certainly the subject matter is most probably playing on our emotions. Would that be a fair assessment from your experience?
Yeah, 100%. I think one of the things that we've got to be is vigilant, right? I think everyone is in a heightened emotional state. Yeah, it's not just about the impact of the pandemic itself. We've had family members lost. We've had people we care about that have passed on. We've lost livelihoods. We are in a very strained economy, and that's a prime forum for organized crime and criminal activity to exploit people that are feeling quite vulnerable. And then think about all of the vulnerable people that are actually out there that may not be getting the support they need. So I think there's not just been a impact on our physical health. There's been a huge impact on our mental health, and it's something that we need to, as a community, need to start addressing and helping and supporting more.
As somebody who's worked in the industry a long time, what's the answer to that, particularly around home working, and the multiple laptops? And what's the answer to that? It sounds tricky to me.
It is, and I think we so look, if you're an organization and you understand that you've got people that are potentially under strain, you've got to give them a break. You've got to be able to say, well, here are the tools and the processes that you need in order to effectively do your job. But actually, there shouldn't be a requirement. Like, I've heard in certain circumstances where people are being forced to come on camera, and that has another, sort of damaging impact on their mental health. When it comes to security, I think it's really important that organizations support you. So, one of the key things I would say is, if an organization can buy a license for an antivirus, give it to them for free. Yeah, right. provide them with access to, VPN software.
Yeah.
There's lots of things that organizations can do to make the life of their employees a lot easier during the pandemic. And it's cheap as chips, right? If they buy it en masse.
Yeah. Something like Avast is quite a good product. VPN rolled in, you get something, you get all the antivirus, you get everything, malware, and certainly email support in terms of being able to detect intrusion as well. So yeah, I absolutely agree with that.
Yeah, and the other bit of advice I would give is if you've talk to your service providers, because actually your service providers can provide you with a whole bunch of security, right? From your home network and securing that, even your banks may provide you with security software as well. So it's worthwhile just investigating where you can get some stuff for free. And look, there's a lot of organizations out there that would be willing to help. Give free stuff. So if your company's not doing it, go and investigate yourself, I would say.
Cool. Excellent. Second question, Nav. How has the impact of COVID affected the way that we technically transact?
That's a really good question. I think I think it's shifted dramatically. So we've seen this massive increase in the use of technology because there's no other way for us to transact, right? Yeah. I was talking to someone the other day, and they go, they got so bored of doing stuff on Zoom, they actually started writing letters again. Because, it's just like, so I think that there is a sense of fatigue, definitely, and when we talk about security and this massive change in this paradigm shift in the way that we're using technology. There are simple things that organizations have failed to do as a result, right? Two-factor authentication, right? That's, I keep seeing it, basic hygiene around, some of their remote access services and systems. We were in a position in March and April where the country shut down and suddenly everyone had to, remote work. And the capacity of that was huge. Actually, so much so, it caused a significant drain on our own national infrastructure with huge outages across the country, right? Because of the volumes of, data that's been transacting. So, yeah, it's definitely changed. And I would say, it's probably going to be like this for the next year or so. It's just not going to differ. And I think also, if we think about what the pandemic has done, it's made organizations realize is that bums on seats doesn't even equate to productivity. And they will have to rethink their business strategies come 2022.
Thanks, Nav. When I think about the pandemic and forcing the shift really to us working in a different way, a simple question is, Natalie's in the office this morning. She's downstairs. She's not probably listening to this, but she works for me. But one of the interesting things was, Natalie, why are you here today? Because I don't want you stealing my bandwidth. That might sound like a 2005 question, but it's the landscape we're in, isn't it? It's the landscape that everyone wants everyone's bandwidth, and we're thinking about these things that we never thought about before because of what COVID's actually forced us to do. There's a quite interesting, for people on the call, for those people interested in human factors in cybersecurity, there is, and you might want to write this down, and I think it's a great paper. It's called Human Factors. The paper is called Human Factors, and it's produced by an organization called cybok.org. So it's cybok.org. And ultimately, it is a combination, a combo between three universities. But in the UK, it's University College London and University of Bristol. Aswad Rashid has put this together, and it's a great study on the influences, the human factors in cybersecurity. And one of the things that Nav just picked up about us being fatigued and being focused and now online is that fundamentally, if you read that paper, and it's cybok.org, and you put in human factors on the Google, you'll find it. It's a great paper. I'd recommend it to anyone in cybersecurity thinking about, and it's about designing systems around people, so enabling security around people and what their capabilities are. But fundamentally, the report is all about evidence-based. It is about, actually, as human beings, we'll take the shortest route. So we've all seen those pictures, haven't we, on LinkedIn, whereby there's a path built and people have cut across the grass. We've all seen those because we're all focused on getting the job done. And of course, as Nav quite rightly said, if you're at home, you're homeschooling, you've got the kids, you've got the house to run, you're worried about, for example, whether you'll be on furlough or not, you're worried about you might be under notice of redundancy. And your factors are, actually, I've got a job to do, I'm going to get it done really quickly, and I might cut corners. And I think Nav's really highlighted that COVID world has actually increased that pressure on us to get things done, because I think as human beings we're in that mindset of we need to demonstrate that we're adding value because we're working from home, for example. We need to get into that place, so therefore we need to get the job done. And of course, the minute you start getting the job done quickly, you cut corners. A good example of that was on Monday night. For those people who know, I work as a healthcare assistant in the A&E at my local hospital, and I was asked quickly to admit a patient, and I was doing two jobs at once. And all of a sudden, I was on the computer and thought, stop, you need to stop and deal with one task at a time, because actually your main focus is on that patient rather than trying to do two jobs at once, because you'll forget. So I think Nav's point was very relevant there, that we're in this scenario whereby people are working from home, they're under pressure, they have mental health pressures. There are certainly pressures on to justify one's working environment at home. Not every boss or leader is in the 21st century in terms of their thinking about outcome-based work. So I think it's really relevant, the words you've said now. Now, I'm going to move on to the third question. So have we, do you think, compromised security in the light of the pandemic? Would it be a fair assessment? One of the questions that came in is, you know, because of this race to work from home, but also let's look at the broader picture, track and trace. Let's look at the broader picture of being able to log a vaccination online. Have we compromised security in terms of our race to beat COVID, Nav?
I would say probably yes. And you picked up on a really interesting point there about track and trace, and you know, not uncommon for governments to rush out technical solutions and they be insecure. But the most interesting thing about track and trace was that the NCSC actually told them it was insecure and they shouldn't release it. So it wasn't secure by design. And for something that contained that kind of data, you would expect it to, pass quite rigorous testing. So it's a great example of where big consultancies have come in and built something and pushed it out for government, and it's failed. But I think a lot of organizations have failed to put in basic security hygiene. I mentioned it before: two-factor authentication on services, secure ID, remote access tokens. Yeah, right. There's another way. Just having multi-layered authentication. So if you're now a system administrator and you're no longer on site and you've got privileged access, you've got elevated access to something, make sure you're putting in the right controls, because if any of those things are compromised, you're potentially compromising your entire service. So yeah, and simple things like not providing effective controls over desktops, or what access people can have, as a result of working from home. Now, there's certain things that people can't do. If you're in a regulated environment, you potentially cannot, work from home. Yeah, if you're working financial services and you're on a trade floor, there are strict regulations around that. So yes, I think organizations have definitely compromised themselves. So what they need to be doing now is going back and looking at what that transformation was all about, and then fixing those problems. Go back and have a look at the basic hygiene stuff, right? If you've moved your entire workforce onto a digital platform, your security team is going to be busy trying to get stuff done. And the other thing is that generally the security teams would, they're about enabling. They're not about, preventing a business from doing something. They're going to have a tough job if someone has accepted the risk of pushing out technology before it was due. They're going to have to go back and fix it all. So yeah, it's a tricky one.
Yeah, but now you and I have worked together in environments whereby organizations might say, well, show me the dollar, show me the risk, and so if you're selling that tricky message whereby company might have seen a drop in trade, they might have seen a drop in net profit, they might have For example, if you're retail, you're closing high street shops, you're moving staff out, you're making staff redundant, and then Nav coming along trying to sell. You're trying to sell this message of cyber security. It's a difficult sell, isn't it, in the current landscape? Do you think?
I think it's always been a difficult sell, and that's partially because a lot of us are continuing to talk about cybersecurity in technical terms. We're not talking about it in a monetary term. So if you actually flip that whole concept and say, well, you're likely to lose more money by not doing something versus accepting a risk, we've really got to narrow it down to quite specifics. And that's also complicated because a lot of what we do is qualitative, right? Unless you've got very defined risk models that you can map monetarily back into your environment, everything is subjective. It's a potential risk. It may materialize, but if it does materialize, this is how much it's going to cost you. And I think that's the only way that businesses really understand. If it's all predictive and projected, you're likely to get a lot of pushback. You've got to go with some. I
suppose the argument can be flipped on its head as well to our advantage, and I mean all the practitioners on the call today. To our advantage, saying, well, look, at the moment, our only platform is the digital platform, for example. For example, we closed a few high street shops, or we've no longer got people working in large offices of which we could control. So therefore, our only business is what we see on the screen. For example, if we're running a retail business, it's what we're seeing coming through the front door of the website. So therefore, as it's now our business, and as our business model has now changed to, for example, 75% online retailing, therefore, the importance of cybersecurity has now escalated in the organisation. So I suppose there's an advantage, isn't it, of us being in this post-COVID world now.
Yeah, absolutely, and not making light of it. I think the cybersecurity community has never been busier, right? And it's a positive thing that's come out of a terrible thing, right? So yeah, I do think that the importance, as we move forward with any digital revolution, right? We're going to need much more enhanced capabilities around cybersecurity. But I think the key thing, and you picked up on it as well, Nigel, is it's all about people. So there's no point organisations going and buying, that £5 million security system. A person still needs to configure it. A person still needs to manage it. A person still needs to run it. And people then need to follow the rules. And if you don't, then your £5 million system is worthless, right? Mm. It's all about people at the end of the day.
Now, just as something that interests me, what are we seeing at the moment in terms of who's at the back of all these attacks? Who's at the back of the brute force attack we were talking earlier? I like all this stuff. I read my latest Jack Reacher book, and it was all about a malware attack on for those people who haven't read the latest Lee Charles Jack Reacher book, it was all about a malware attack on a small town in the Midwest, in the States, etc. And who's at the back of what's going on at the moment?
I mean, you could divide it into a couple of things. You've got your low-level opportunistic criminal that's trying to scam your credit. You've got your organized crime groups that are trying to target individuals. But actually, 2020 saw a significant increase in nation-state attacks, right? From Russia, from China, from North Korea. And interestingly enough, they were all focused around COVID research, right? It was a primer during the development of the vaccine. The biggest target were universities, and quite an interesting story about a university in the United States where they were attacked by both Russia, organized nation-state attacks or organizations working on behalf of the nation-state, attacked a university in America. And the end result was that all of their data was held to ransom. And I think it was about 1.6 million or 1.7 million that they asked for. The problem is that the university chairman paid it get his data back, and shortly afterwards was arrested by the FBI because it's a criminal offense in the United States to do that. So it's quite interesting that a lot of educational institutions were the primers of this, and that's only the ones that we know of, right? It is likely that some of the other institutions that were subjected to these attacks may have not disclosed what happened. But it's going to be quite interesting to see whether that level of attack at a nation state level will continue. We saw it with the US elections. There was a lot of talk about, meddling in the US elections. Obviously, the chief information security officer for that had oversight of that was then let go by Trump, which was very interesting because he just did his job, right? We had a report that came out in the UK, by the Security Commission that actually said there was possibility that there was meddling in the Brexit campaign and the elections there. So look, it's never going to stop, right? We're just going to see an escalation of it. And if you kind of think we're in a cyber Cold War at the moment, right? It's very much like that.
Yeah, and you don't have to line up your tanks, do you, on the East German border anymore, and then like the old school. Or for example, if you look after the Second World War, there was a great rush to steal each other's nuclear bombs plans and etc. And the Cold War really kicked off from there. And I suppose that if you can create havoc and mayhem from sitting in an office somewhere around the world, then there's no need for all that infrastructure around military hardware, because you can create enough damage without actually doing that from a state. What interests me though, Navi, is the complexity of cyber attacks, particularly on commercial enterprises. Industrial espionage has been around for years, and we know that industrial espionage is key, but going back to some of the breaches of 2020 and maybe 2019, the BA attack, for example, is an interesting one. The Magic Card attack on BA and the subsequent finding of those. The interesting thing for me around those is that, it's a sophisticated network. It's not just a bunch of men and women sitting in an office somewhere and thinking it'll be a great idea to do that. Because ultimately, if you're stealing, for example, 35 million quid, you've got to launder it somewhere. You've got to send it through. So it must be a complex network, particularly in the commercial world now, and a really industrialized scale of attacks that we're seeing on organizations. Because you've got to get rid of the dough at the end. You've got to fence it off, haven't you? So.
Yeah, and the BA attack was very interesting because that was just a misconfiguration on a server, right? The website allowed the attackers to get it, so that's just bad design and luck, right? From an operational point of view. I think that one of the key things about the complexities of attack is that if you're launching a significant attack, you need processing power, you need and you need people. It's a business, right? So you could jump on the dark web and find a whole bunch of people, hacktivist groups, whatever, and you could go and recruit, and it's not a difficult thing to do. The question is, if you look at a really good example, something I spoke about recently was the Swift attack in the Bank of Bangladesh, right? That was a really interesting one because, ultimately they were receiving legitimate messages. Yeah, right. They were receiving legitimate encrypted messages. But they had, and the clearing bank in New York received those messages in the middle of the night and, didn't really question them. They actually attempted to heist $1 billion. Problem was they paid out on 100 million. And because they were legitimate, and because that network was compromised, these guys, as big as heist in Bangladesh, right? 100 million. It's where's that money gone? Who knows? So yeah, you're absolutely right. It's a really complex network of people, individuals, institutions, and that's probably why if you touch on financial crime risk there, right? Hence why. In most parts of the world, you require effective KYC, you require effective due diligence around, your transactional activity. It's really important.
Now, just touching on that, and now you're in Dubai, which is exciting news. And I must come across the Rugby Sevens next year, and I haven't been if it's on, but hopefully it will be. You touched on about standards in cybersecurity, and is the world adopting a single process, a single, dare I say, standard of cybersecurity around the world as a result of COVID? Or are we in the pre-COVID world where everyone's adopting what they perceive to be their own standard?
So it's a really good question, and something that we've been talking about for a while. Well, there isn't. There are international standards around cybersecurity that some people adopt and some people don't, and a lot of it's guidance. Cybersecurity isn't a regulated function, right? There isn't government oversight over it, and maybe there needs to be. I mean, in some cases, definitely in the Middle East, they have specific requirements around cybersecurity if you're transacting with government bodies, and we have a similar thing, with cybersecurity, Cyber Essentials and Essentials Plus, in the UK if you're a third-party service. So I do think we're still in that pre-COVID world where actually we've become slightly more nationalistic. It's become much more focused internally. Excuse me, rather than and COVID has done this as well, and I don't know if you've noticed, it's made countries insular.
Yeah.
And the failure of the likes of the United Nations and other international institutions, I mean, isn't that what they're there for, right? So it makes you wonder, why we as a human race decided to, just sort of go our separate ways. And cybersecurity is becoming like that. It actually started in Asia where a few years ago, so back in 2000, probably 2003, 2004, the Monetary Authority of Singapore came up with this IT controls framework, and they enforced it across all financial institutions. And it's huge, it's like 150 pages. And the expectation was compliance, not security. So you comply with it. But then Malaysia introduced their own, Hong Kong introduced their own, and it started a treacle. Whereas actually the stuff that the FCA and the PRA do is rather non-prescriptive. Yeah, it's more like guidance. So I would love to see the industry regulated by a central body. It would be good, because at least then we would then have some consistency in the way that we approach cybersecurity across borders.
And I could get Nigel to write a wonderful thriller on the basis of the infiltration of that central body. Fantastic. It would be great.
Yeah.
Nav, and that brings me nicely onto onto what was the UK's government response to the pandemic in terms of cybersecurity? Was it positive? Was it, in your opinion, was it sensible? Was it, or was it just reactive because look, we've never faced anything like this in the cyber world before, so we're going to do this.
So I take my hat off to the guys that work in cybersecurity for the UK government. The NCSC, who the National Cybersecurity Centre, which is an offshoot of GCHQ. So all credit to them, because they're dealing with stuff that they can't tell us about, generally, and they're dealing with stuff that they can tell us about. And I think let's say their call to action was rapid. It was measured, I'll give them that, and it was informative. And I think they took the time to think about how best to help educate a user base. I think what I really did like was the uplift of their sort of emergency service, reporting, and people actually were using it. The only problem is that when it comes to reporting cybersecurity incidents to government and reporting it to the police, they are understaffed, they are underfunded. They don't, we've not invested in that part of our critical national infrastructure. You may have one cyber protect lead for every police force, right? And if you're being attacked, right, and you dial 999, you're not going to get anywhere. You know, you could wait months before someone supports you. So look, you know, we've got a lot of room for improvement in the way that we deal with it at a national level. And if we think about the most vulnerable out there, it's not going to be the critical national infrastructure. It's going to be just us, normal people. And so, you know, I think cybersecurity needs to become part of our curriculum. It needs to be educated. You know, we need to be educating people at schools.
Hey, we didn't rehearse this, but comes on to my next question, and it's one that's dear to my heart. It's about development of talent in the future, and that wasn't we didn't rehearse that, but it's about now. If you and I were sitting in the refectory at Yeovil College, Nav and I'm from Devon, Nav's from Somerset, so we're West Country boys.
Yeah.
If we're sitting in the refectory and saying that's this cybersecurity stuff, mate, this looks a bit dull, this looks a bit boring, but actually we can make a great career out of ourselves. How do we get people enthused of becoming the cybersecurity experts of the future? We've got loads on the call today, but how do we get people enthused and how do we get people into the industry? Because it is a challenge. I did some work, as you most probably know, with the states of Jersey, the Jersey government, and there were just 3 people on the cybersecurity team, and if you look at it, or they're not the cybersecurity, but they're the information governance and the information security team, and if you look at it, they're looking at the critical national infrastructure such as electricity and gas and systems and telecoms and those sort of things. But and the conversation I had with my colleagues over in Jersey was that we just can't get people interested because it is all seen to be dark rooms, people tapping on computers, and it's all to be smoke and mirrors. How can we get people involved in it now, and how can we get it part of the national curriculum, get it up the agenda? It's a great career to have, and to be fair, it will keep you in employment for the next 50, 60 years. Yeah.
I mean, I think, you raise a really good point about, so I think that us as practitioners have a responsibility to help bring the next generation of talent in. Right? We have to communicate the pathways that people can pick and choose in order to become proficient. Now, look, cybersecurity is a huge topic. There isn't just one discipline. There are multiple disciplines within the discipline. So do your research, right? We're not as a community very good at demystifying things. So actually, one of my missions is let's just make it simple, right? Take it down to its most basic level, and start educating both individuals and businesses that actually cybersecurity is about business risk, and let's start educating at a young age, right? And there are so many avenues for kids age 8 to 13 to start to learn how to develop the skills in cybersecurity, start to program, start to develop, effectively become ethical hackers. There's lots of routes that people can take, but 100% I think it's really important that we start at a very young age, because actually by the time that we're 20 years from now, everything that we do is going to be digitally dependent. And if we don't understand how to protect ourselves as individuals, or we don't understand how to protect ourselves as organizations, we're all going to be at risk. So I think at some point it just has to be that it's like putting your seatbelt on, right? It's just a normal reaction you have when you get into a car. Cybersecurity has got to be in the same way.
And I think one way we could most probably, and I totally agree with you, one thing we can make it simple is actually show the journeys. So show the career paths in simple formats, cartoon formats or vignettes formats, so that you can actually show a journey and tell a story. And of course, the great thing about cybersecurity is, and all business that it is gender neutral. It is not a career for hairy blokes sitting in their bedroom. It is a career. No offence, Nav, where you currently are. No offence, but it is gender neutral, isn't it? It is absolutely. We want men and women enthused into cybersecurity to say it's a great career to have.
Yeah,
no disrespect, but you're a role model. I always thought you was a role model in the organisation and that we've worked with, and also in the industry, to be able to say, look, we come from the West Country. We don't all drink cider, and we do sometimes, but and choose straw. But actually, there is a great career and a great opportunity for us.
Yeah, and you touched on something really important about neutrality, and I would say it starts with, again, the way we think. So, if you're a hiring manager in cybersecurity, and I say this to anyone that works in HR, human resources, or people, right? Your objective is to pull in the best talent, but that talent isn't necessarily about technical capability. Think about the person, think about who you want to work with. When I hire someone, the first thought I have is, am I going to get along with them, right?
Me too. Me too.
Are they good people, right? uh, because I can teach them technical skills. So if you're writing job descriptions, forget all of that stuff. We call them softer skills, but actually, to work in cybersecurity, you need effective communication skills, you need negotiation skills, right? These are not softer skills. This is a part of who you are. And I would say another thing is that men and women digest information 100% differently. And so where a guy would look at, and again, just psychology 101, when a guy looks at a cybersecurity role, a man looks at a cybersecurity role, even if he can't do all the things that are listed on there, he'll still apply, right? Because he will. The confidence in doing it, and sometimes because of women's analytical thinking, they may look at something and say, actually, I don't have a CISSP, so therefore I don't qualify, and I'm not going to do it. So again, note to hiring managers: get rid of. You don't need a 6-page job description. 5 lines. If you can't describe what the role is in 5 lines, don't post it.
Love it. Love it. Nav, we put in an hour for these. We always try and stick on about 45 minutes to 50 minutes, and we're getting close to it. So I've most probably got 1 or 2 questions left, and I suppose where do we go from here? We're now in not post-COVID world. We're now in a world whereby we're vaccinating lots of people, which is great. So the circumstances which happened 6-7 months ago, where the expectation was that we would go through a series of lockdowns until we got the numbers down to a manageable level, are now dissipating. So people are keen to get back into the office, keen to get back into an environment whereby they had some sort of normality. Although we won't get back to the position we were before, where do we go now for the next 2-3 years? What do you see the landscape looking like in terms of the industry, cybersecurity, and the potential threats that might exist?
So I genuinely believe we're gonna feel the headache of COVID for, let's call it a hangover rather than a headache. We'll feel the hangover of COVID for at least 2 years. We're gonna see the number of the threat landscapes change, because actually our method of working has changed. And so we have to adapt. We have to adapt and adopt relatively quickly to be able to address some of that change. So I think it's really important that, as I was saying earlier on, if you have done a rapid digital transformation, go back, right? If you've rolled out, go back and look, right? Go back and check. Go back and make sure that you've done all the basic things that you need to do, because we're likely to see organizations compromised as a result of that rapid digital transformation. And if you're a small business, you may not be able to afford a breach, right? You may not be able to afford a compromise. I think in terms of general business operation, you raised a really good point about people being vaccinated and wanting to get out. At some point, we're going to have to think about what that means globally, and what happens when people aren't vaccinated. Are we going to end up in a passport kind of scenario situation where your medical data is suddenly then available to any country in the world because you need to prove that you're not a carrier of a disease? The other complexity with that is it the value, the time that you are protected by the vaccine as well, right? So there's been lots of talks about global databases and access to medical information. It's going to be interesting to see how that plays out over the next year. And for it to be effective, if you were to believe the World Health Organization, you need 70% of your population to be vaccinated to be able to get some immunity. And how are we going to track that data? I wouldn't use track and trace, right? But yeah, I think yeah, put Dido Harding in front of track and trace. Really, yeah, that's very clever.
Okay, so now one last question, and it's sort of linked to that. Did you think we have, as individuals, become, dare I say, more risk averse or risk friendly in the COVID world?
I think we were already a little bit risk averse, but I think it's the risk and reward scenario now, right?
Right.
And where we are as a nation, definitely in the United Kingdom, we are, in a double dip recession. People have lost their livelihoods. Things have changed, right? It's just such a different world. So I think people and businesses. I took a risk. I left the country and set up a business on the other side of the world, right? I think we have to look at the world in a very different way. And look, we're still not out of the woods. We've still got some time to go before things get to whatever you call normal. But I think we just have to accept that the world has changed and try our best to recover from it.
Now, thank you very much as ever. Great luck with the cyber paradox. Great luck with the good luck with the. I'm sure you won't need it. The work in Dubai. I'm absolutely looking forward to seeing you smash it, and looking forward to seeing you on the next cyber paradox. And thank you very much for joining me this morning.
I really appreciate it, Nigel. Thank you for the invitation.
Thank you very much. We'll speak soon. Take care. And for those people who haven't watched Nav's Cyber Paradox, I would highly recommend you logging on. They're really informative. They're really good. Are they every month? I can't remember when they're every 2 weeks or something.
Yeah, every couple of weeks, the Cybertree Paradox podcast, season 1's out. It's on our website, thecybertreeparadox.com. You can download season 1. Season 2's airing on wherever you get your podcasts. They're on multiple places. Yeah, and we've got episode 1 of the documentary series out, which we did on threat intelligence, and episode 2, which is on education, training, and awareness, will be out this quarter. So yeah.
Fantastic. Looking forward to it. Take care, Nav. Take care, everyone. And we'll see you next time on the Privacy Pulse. Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you.